So welcome again, everyone. The whole idea of today was to look at the, the idea of creating multi-device e-learning without going down the responsive path and the Fluidbox path. And I was inspired actually by this particular ad that I saw on SBS. And I don't know if if any of you have actually come across the SBS Cultural Competence Program. They have been running some advertising on SBS over the last 6 months or so, and you can actually sign on either as an individual or as a company. It does cost money. I haven't actually paid for it yet, but and I probably should just to get the experience. But the thing that actually that jumped out at me while I was viewing this ad, and I'm actually just going to fast forward to it a bit, and it's actually this part right here. Okay, so if you look carefully at that screen, and feel free to provide some feedback in the chat. If you look at that screen, hopefully you can see the screen in front, the SBS video. This was the ad that they showed on TV. Can anyone provide any feedback or anything that sort of jumps out at them as far as how that particular screen is presented or how that content is presented? Anyone want to provide any immediate observations on that screen right there in front of us? Can you all see that? Mira's typing away. Oh, I've got a few people typing away. What do you notice about that screen? And it can be anything. It can be the colors. I think they've used some good colors. Sarah, blank space on either side. Excellent. Anyone else want to add to small window of a desktop computer? Yeah, sure. It's a big monitor. Now, the interesting thing that I noticed when I saw this was exactly what Sarah has mentioned there. There is blank space on either side. And if we look a little bit further as we go along, and here's another example. So what I got from this is that they are presenting this content. It seems to be consistent throughout the whole module. Is that they're presenting this content, but they're not actually presenting it in landscape. They're presenting it in portrait, even though it's on a landscape monitor. Now, also, as we go further on, here's a user who is looking at the content on let's go back a little bit. Just a few seconds. Let's see if we can. There we go. So that's exactly the same content, but now on an iPad. Admittedly, the iPad is portrait as well. So you can see what they've done here. They've created the content in such a way that it pretty much looks exactly the same, whether it's on a desktop computer, whether it's on a iPad, and that iPad is portrait. There's another sample of the content that's on a desktop computer. And last but not least, someone's actually looking at it on a phone, even though we don't get that much of we can't really see what it looks like on a phone. That's just the main menu. But that content would also sit on a phone quite well. Now, also, for those of you, hopefully you can see what I've held up. This is actually the link that I put in the chat there. Now, this link is actually displayed on a phone. So you can see this is an old Samsung Note. And as you press the buttons, you'll see that you can sort of click through. And here's the same content. Here's the same module on a desktop computer. So the thing that I want to really call out here is that this content on a desktop, for example, you'll notice that if I make the browser window a lot smaller, everything scales proportionately to the original constrained ratio of that module. And if I expand the window, you'll now notice that I've got the colored space or the blank space either side as well. So, and here's the module. It's just pretty much clicking on some buttons and then going around and around. Big text, not a lot going on each screen. This is to allow the content to be interacted with on a mobile phone as well. So what we're looking at doing here is we're creating exactly the same module that's going to be able to be viewed across multiple devices, and we're not using fluid boxes, and we are not using the responsive Captivate option. Now, a couple of things also. I do have the finished products in Captivate in front of us, but what I wanted to point out quickly was some of the benefits or the pros and cons of going down the responsive path compared to going down just a normal project path in Captivate. Let's have a look at a couple of things. So I'm just going to go in and create a new responsive project. Now, the responsive project doesn't initially ask you for a canvas size. It just goes straight in and allows you to create that content. Now, here's the thing with the responsive project. I'm going to put in, actually, I might just copy stuff across, might be easier. So, recreating it. Now, here's the content brought in from the other slide, the other project. Now, this particular example is landscape. Now, if I was to put this into portrait, so I can go in and choose one of my preview in options, and you'll notice straight away that it starts to muck up. Now, if you have an absolute requirement that you need to present content that fits in landscape and also needs to adjust in portrait, that's where the whole idea of responsive comes in. So the word responsive actually relates to the content being able to respond when it changes from landscape to portrait and then portrait to landscape. What we're looking at is we're looking at what's called scalable. So our content isn't going to respond, it's going to scale, but we're still going to try and make it appear and deliver nicely in portrait and landscape, even though it is going to stay just as portrait. You could apply the same approach if it was just going to be in landscape. However, the end user would need to interact with that content with their device in landscape. So their desktop needs to be in landscape, their iPad would need to be in landscape to get the maximum response, and also their phone would need to be in landscape. Now, here's the problem, not a problem, here's something to be mindful of when working with responsive projects. And the main thing that I want to point out here, I'm not going to go down the whole fluid box thing today, but the main thing that I wanted to point out here is when you publish a responsive project, you'll see here that it publishes just as HTML5 only, which is what we want. But there's no option here which allows for what's called scalable. Now, just before I publish this, I'm going to just jump out of this window. I'm going to go back to my normal project, which is just a blank project. And when I go to publish, I want you to notice that the publish window is quite different to what we looked at when we were publishing a responsive project. I'm only going to publish as HTML5 only, but you'll see I've got this option called scalable HTML content. Now that box, that checkbox, is the key to making all of this work. Those of you who are online watching this, has anyone used that option before, scalable HTML content, when publishing? Now, I'll just show you what happens when we do publish this responsive project. So I'm just going to go in and publish this responsive project. I'll just put it onto my desktop. Go. Select folder. I'm just going to publish this. I won't worry about anything else at the moment. Nicholas, all the time, but there is an issue with text and images not being as sharp. I'm going to answer. Sorry, I'm looking over here. I've got another monitor. Nicholas, I'm going to answer your question. I'm going to fix that. Yes, there is a workaround for that. Okay, so here is my responsive project published, and you'll notice what it's doing here is the original canvas size of this particular project. Now, this is responsive, by the way. I'm still in the responsive, and I can tell because I've got this slider along the top. The original canvas size, down the bottom here, it says 1024 by 627. I can go in and rescale this project and make it bigger. And what I have done in the past is I've actually made responsive projects bigger, but you'll see what happens is it doesn't scale. So this responsive project is stuck at that size. Now, of course, if I do go to bring this in as a mobile device, you'll see that the height actually doesn't change either. If I do change the height of the browser, so this is all sort of representing the output screen of the device itself, you'll see that I still would need to scroll up and down that window. So look, responsive is great as far as if you need to, as I said before, if you really need to have a landscape and portrait output, and then you need to adjust content on the screen, responsive is the way to go. But I think, personally, I think we can handle a lot of multi-device output and experience by going down the normal path. And this is just by going through a new blank project. Okay, and just to quickly show you a little bit of a trap that you can fall into, and I won't build this whole thing from scratch because a lot of this is really around how you set your project up. So I want to focus on how you set it up, and I also want to focus on a couple of things around publishing, and also what Nicholas referred to, having some problems with text and images not being as sharp. So with regards to the scalable, so I'm going to close down the responsive project because I'm not using it anymore. So I'm in this scalable project. Now, here's a little bit of a trap that you can fall into. You might want to have a quick preview to see how this looks scalable. Now, the problem is that if you do preview HTML5 in browser, the problem is that it doesn't actually scale. So you'll notice here that I'm making the actual browser window bigger and smaller, and it's actually not scaling. So that's a little bit of a trap. So if you do actually want to test your scalable content, you would need to go through, you would need to publish, and you would need to tick that box. And I'm just going to put this back on the desktop because I've already got a version under folder. So when you go to publish, and then obviously when it publishes, it does allow you to view the output. So of course you can go in and view that output straight away. And you'll now notice that if I change this, I change the size of that browser window, that it is actually scaling. So it's a really true scaling that's happening there. Okay, so Nicholas, to answer your question, when you go to create your content or your blank project, what I actually suggest is you make the actual canvas size really big. So when you bring objects in, so for example, if you're going to do a landscape scalable project, you'll see I've actually set up a custom option here, which is 1920 by 1080, which is actually the resolution of my monitor at the moment. So if I was to click on OK, and the thing that happens here is that the canvas size can be quite big. You'll notice that it's actually quite big. For those of you who like your shortcut keys, you might want to go in straight away and do a Control-0 to zoom out. And you'll notice you can zoom out to sort of 33, 50%, etc. You'll see that it's quite wide, so that canvas size is a true reflection of my current monitor resolution. Now, Nicholas, what happens now is that if we were to go and publish this this module at this resolution, then because the content was created at that resolution, when it gets published, that's its standard resolution. So all of the content on the project will present based on that resolution that you've developed at, which is 1920 by 1080. It's not going to scale up. Now, if you were to create a project, if you were to go create a new project, good question, Mem. Not really. Not overly big as far as your question is concerned, as far as file size is concerned. No, not that much at all, because Captivate does a pretty good job at compressing as it's getting published. So going back quickly, if we were to create just a stock standard 1024 by 768 module, now what happens here is that, and we'll just do a quick, I might just bring in the image. This is one of my favorites, I don't know why. I'm going to fit to stage. So maybe let's just stick that in the middle. And then I'm going to go back to my large project, and I'm going to bring in the same image. You'll notice that I don't have to sort of bring that down too much. Now, if I go to publish this one, I'm going to publish it as, let's have a look, what's your question there, Nicholas? We even found that even when viewing at the actual size, smaller and larger, it's not as sharp. As soon as I untick scalable and view at project size, it's crisp. Yeah, good point. So anytime you're stretching content, you have to allow for the fact that the computer is re-rendering the content to fit with that resolution. So it may, you're going to get a little bit of a potentially hit and miss. I've found that if you do create at this larger resolution, then you don't get the as much fuzziness going on. So I'm just going to publish that. That's probably not a good image, actually. I should have probably used a better image. But you'll see that chair is quite still quite sharp. So that chair in the background. Now, if I go to this this example here, 1024 by 768. So I'm going to publish this one. And these are some experiments that you could probably just try back at work. I'll just do this one, 1024 by 768. I'll just publish that. It's scalable. Yes. And yeah, this image is probably not a good one, but I guess the moral of this story is that you'd probably want to bring your images in quite sharp to start off with, and I would work with a larger canvas size in that regard. A couple of other things that I did want to point out to you as well is that with the example that we've got up on the internet, you'll notice that this play screen, now some of you might have come across the fact that Captivate files don't play automatically anymore. You do get this this play button automatically appearing. Now, some of you may have come across the fact that you can put your own image in the background. this comes back to an original option that's always been available. And if you do go into Edit and Preferences, and I just want to quickly show you this, that under the Start and End option of the project, you can select an image, or you can import an image that's going to show as an autoplay image. Now, even if you tick that box autoplay, depending on the browser, it may still play, but there's been a general consensus across the World Wide Web Consortium and across all browser makers that media content is not going to play automatically from October. I think that's the deadline they've set, and the browsers are all jumping on board. So no media content, videos, audio, etc., and this is considered media, will not play automatically. So we are going to be stuck with this play button, but at least you can put your own backgrounds on the back there as well. Another thing here, we've got this this hand gesture option. So sometimes it's worthwhile turning that off, and that actually does fall under. I do have a prize for anyone who can. There is over there. So allow gesture navigation. So you would actually take that option off because what gesture navigation actually does allow people to do is they can override your buttons in your interactions. So you'll see here swipe left and swipe right. It doesn't matter what buttons you've got on there. Swipe left and swipe right will just go from one slide to the next. So it's probably worthwhile considering and turning that option off. And you'll see that's a bit of a slide by slide. So you may want to just go in. You can select all of the slides and take that button off as well. A couple of other things that I just wanted to draw to your attention. You'll see here that I've actually got a different colored background than what you normally would. So that background sort of ties in with the color scheme of the actual project. Now this is actually determined back in our preferences, and if we go to, remembering where it is, I just did this before. Now it's not this one. Oh my God. I just had a mental blank. It's background color. No, sorry, I just remembered. To impact the HTML background color of your published project, you go into Project and Skin Editor, and we're looking at this option where you've got playback control, borders, and table of contents. Some of you might go through and use this table of contents, but we go into where it says borders. And under borders, you'll see here it says HTML background. So this is where we can control the background color of the project. So if you are potentially thinking of going down this particular path where you want to present it sort of portrait to allow for phone and also iPad portrait and also desktop portrait, you might want to consider looking at changing the background color of the HTML. And this is done through borders and then HTML background. So I might just go in and change that. You'll see that it doesn't really show in the preview. So what we need to do there is, and even if we do an HTML5 preview, just double checking. There you go. So you can do an HTML5 preview. So you can now see the HTML background page actually changing color as well. Also, you'll see here that I've got a little cross up in the top left-hand corner, and what that means here is that through the HTML5 preview, that loading screen isn't showing, or that start and end autoplay background isn't showing. So you do actually have to publish it onto the internet for that to show properly. And even some browsers are a little bit jumpy with that. So as far as that's concerned, that's pretty much the setup of getting your project set up. I would suggest once again potentially, and you would need to talk to your or find out your end audience. Are you looking at a mobile first? Are you looking at a mobile first approach, which would most normally mean a portrait approach? Do you want that to be working on a desktop device as well? And how much time do you have? It does come back down to time and budget. If you've got the time to do a proper responsive project, by all means go down the path of creating a responsive project with portrait and then respond to landscape. But personally, I think that if we can think about presenting this type of experience, you only have to build and design one module, and it will display on multi-devices without having to worry about fluid boxes and designing a landscape design and a portrait design. A couple of little tricks that I did also want to point out here, and when you are working with slides, and I don't know about you, but a lot of the time I'm bringing in images that are bigger than the actual slide. So this one, for example. And for the life of me, I'd always struggle. So I might want to crop this image. And here's a little bit of a trick. This is just between you and me, and I'll give this trick to you for free. Now, what if I wanted to crop this image so it just fits perfectly on the slide? And what you can do, of course, you can go into edit image, and then you can go into crop, and then you can try and crop this way, but you really don't know whether you're going to get it exactly on the slide. So that's a bit of a nightmare. And what you can do is you can use alpha here. So I sometimes bring the alpha down a little bit, and you can just see the background of the slide. So I decide, okay, this is the part of the image that I want on the slide. And then what I do is I'll do a right mouse click and I'll merge with background. Now what this does is it not only merges with the background, which you can actually take off if you want, but when you merge with background, click on yes. And now and you'll notice it's actually retained the alpha, so I probably should have taken the alpha back up, but that's okay. But what I can do now is I can do a right mouse click, I can find the background in the library, and here I have an image that has been cropped perfectly to fit that slide. So what I could do now is I could go back into the properties here, I could take the background away that I just merged, and then I know that that image will now fit perfectly on that slide. So that's just a little tip to crop an image to fit perfectly at that slide size. And then obviously you do have that that asset or that library item in your library. Probably what I should have done there is taken the alpha back up. So I'm going to put that back there. And then, of course, what you would do is you would just change the alpha down a little bit so you can see the background of the slide. You can decide what part of the image you want to display on the slide, like so. Then bring the alpha back up, click on OK, and then merge with background. And then the trick with this is to then find background in library by right mouse clicking, and there's the new cropped image that Captivate has cropped for you perfectly. And then you might want to have a number of images, and that's why you're taking it off the background, because you might have a couple of images that you want to display over the course of the timeline. So that's a little trick. especially when working with portrait and wanting to crop images just to fit on the slide. Otherwise, they hang over the edge and all of that sort of stuff. So hopefully that's a little bit of a trick that you have picked up. And really what I did with this particular sample, I've used big buttons. I like the whole idea of the choose your own adventure type games to get people thinking at each slide and creating a narrative or a path for themselves based on the decisions that they make. So big buttons, big text. It's also a good idea to style your buttons. So for those of you who aren't using styles yet, please use styles. The reason for that is, of course, if we use styles, here's a really neat trick. Say I decided that I wanted to make the buttons a little bit bigger. So because I've set my styles up, I might move this up a little bit. And then I just decide to make button A. So all I did was when I was formatting this button, I created a new style. So I clicked on create new style. I'll call the button A. Now here's the thing, and for those of you who are using styles to this degree, well done. But here's a little trick. I might make this a little bit bigger, and I might make the text a little bit bigger. So I might make that 60. And I center that. Now, here's the thing. I you'll see a little plus sign against the style name. So that style has been updated with some new formatting. So I'm just going to save changes to the existing style, and a few buttons will change in the background, such as this one. This one's become a little bit bigger. But I want all of those buttons to now be in exactly the same position and be exactly the same size now. So what I can do here, while that button is selected, I go into my properties panel, I go into options, and where it says transform, I can click on the drop down menu and I can apply to all items of the same style, which means that the dimensions and the position of that object is the same on every slide. So if I click that button there, and you might have noticed that this button became bigger and is in exactly the same spot. and this one here as well. It's still got a plus sign next to it. It didn't pick up the color. If I just reset this side, file, and then that color will adopt the color of button A. So just a little bit of a side note, the power of styles, not only with formatting, but also being able to make the size and position of items consistent and being able to apply that, that those attributes across your whole presentation and across your whole learning, all by the click of a button. So once again, the main things that I wanted to highlight here was when setting up your project, I'm actually going to close these down. I don't worry about saving those changes. I'm going to go back to, I'm just going to close this down for a minute. So you're on your new screen. If you want to create a scalable project, what we do is we go into blank project, and the canvas size is something to be mindful of. So what I chose before is I chose iPad Portrait, and it might even be worthwhile making that a little bit bigger. I would potentially, what I think I did for the last example. Is I've got the